Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're down at the park and I just love how the Spanish moss grows on the trees. And after our walk, I'm going to show you how to make a free-form raspberry tart, which is this wonderful combination of pastry and lightly sweetened fresh raspberries. So I'll meet you back at the kitchen. The first thing we need to do for our free-form raspberry tart is to make our pastry. I like to use my food processor. It makes it really fast and easy, but you could make it by hand. And you will need 1 1/4 cups, which is 175 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. Let's put that right in there, along with 1 tablespoon, 15 grams of granulated white sugar, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which is about 2 grams. I like to use a kosher salt because it has a little milder flavor than regular table salt. And then I'm just going to process this to combine it. If you're doing it by hand, just use a wire whisk or a fork to mix the ingredients together. There we go. And then this is a butter pastry, so you will need 1/2 cup, 113 grams of cold butter. You can use salted or unsalted, whatever your preference. And I like to cut it into little small pieces like this. And what I actually like to do is either maybe the night before or even an hour or so before, I cut it into these pieces and then I put it back in the fridge just to get so each of the little cubes is really cold, because that's what's going to make our pastry nice and flaky. So just a little tip there. And just put that in. Now, if you were doing this by hand, if you have a pastry blender, just cut the butter into the flour with that until you get really coarse crumbs, or you could even use your fingertips for that. So I'm just going to process this. It won't take very long, maybe 10-15 seconds, because you want the butter not like really, you don't want it too fine. Going to check that just a little more. Don't worry if there's some larger chunks of butter when you're doing this, that's okay. So what we're looking for is this. There is some larger chunks of butter, perfectly fine. That's what's going to get, like I said, that's what's going to give our pastry that nice, flakiness. Put that right back in there. And now for the water. Depending on your flour, it will absorb different amounts of water. So you always want to start with less and then you can always add more. So I find somewhere between 2 and 4 tablespoons, up to 1/4 cup, 60 milliliters, and have ice cold water. And I'm going to start with about, say, 3 tablespoons, and you can just sprinkle it over the top. And again, we're not looking for a solid ball of pastry. What we're actually looking for is when we pinch it together, it'll hold. So I'm just going to scrape, because I find tends to stick in the corners. And I'm just going to process that I think I'm going to need just like a little more water. Let's see how that holds together. It's pretty good. Actually, see, when I squeeze it, it holds together. And that's what you're looking for. Because if you process it too much, then your pastry can get a little tough. And we want it nice and flaky and crisp. So now what we're going to do, I have some plastic wrap here, so I'm just going to dump in there. We don't want to handle this too much at this point, so I'm just going to use the corners of my plastic wrap to bring it together. And then what we're going to do is just form it into kind of a round. Not too critical. And then we have to chill it. This will, because we need it firm enough to roll out. So that looks good. So just kind of that. And I'm going to put it into the refrigerator, I find, about an hour, or just until it's firm enough that you can roll it out. So now we're ready to roll out our pastry, but first preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 220 degrees Celsius. And you will need a baking sheet, and I like to line it with a piece of parchment paper, but you could just butter it or spray it with one of those non-stick sprays. And then for our pastry, just put some flour on your counter. Pastry there, and then I like to just put a little on top, and you want to flour your rolling pin. Now we're going to roll this in about a 12 to 13 inch round, which is about 33 centimeters. And whenever you're rolling your pastry, you want to make sure it's even thickness, and keep turning it because you don't want it sticking. And then kind of, you can see, just kind of roll from the center out, because the center tends to be always the thickest. For whatever reason, when we roll, we tend to roll, the center stays thick. So just make sure you're not doing that by rolling from the center out, and just keep turning your pastry. Put more flour down if you have to. If you found that your pastry was really cracking, it's too cold, what you could do is just let it sit on your counter, or just take a rolling pin and kind of tap it. If it was really falling apart and sticking too much to your counter, just, you know, wrap it up and put it back into the fridge for a few more minutes, because maybe it's too soft yet. So just keep rolling. If you find, I mean, this is a free form tart, so I mean, the actual shape, it's not that critical that you have a perfect round. But if you do want that perfect round, you know, just as you're going, you know, just kind of. But this is supposed to be a rustic looking tart. So, you know, it's homemade. So I like it not so perfect. But you can, if you have a ruler, you could measure that out if you want to make sure. And then I just run my hand over it, because that way I can tell which parts are maybe a little thicker, or if the edges are getting thinner, then I can always just kind of. And you know what, if you're new to this, you know, don't worry. Pastry takes a little bit of practice, but the good part is, even if it isn't perfect, it still tastes really good. And no one's going to notice if you have a little cracks and you just pinch it together. Who's going to know but you? Okay. So as you can see, this isn't a perfect circle, but I kind of like it that way. And it's about 12. If you're new to this and you just use your trusty, have a ruler just that you just used in the kitchen for your baking. So now, I'm happy with that. So how we got to transfer our pastry to our pan. So I use my rolling pin for this, and I just go like this, and gently, loosely. And if you have a lot of flour on your pastry, just take a brush or even your hand, and then just as you're rolling, just kind of brush off that extra flour, like so. And then we're just going to unroll it on top of our, like so. So of course, when we were rolling it, it got, you know, our pastry softened up a bit. So what I'm going to do is just cover it with some plastic, put it back in the fridge just for, you know, 10, 15 minutes. And when we come back, we will assemble our tart and bake it. So now we're ready to assemble our raspberry tart. Of course, you're going to need fresh raspberries. The important thing you want is all the raspberries to be about the same size. And I like to use ones that are fairly large. How many do you need? Well, if you're buying them at the store, what I would recommend, you always want extra because you never know. Some usually are soft. But I would get at least 2 of those 6-ounce, 170-gram little plastic containers, at least that, because, and then I always open the lid and then just check, make sure they're all, you want ones that are all uniform in size, and try not to get the ones that are, like there's a lot of mushy ones, and then wash them. And then taste them, because how sweet they are, that will depend how much sugar you want to use. So what I do is take about 1 tablespoon, 15 grams of sugar, and I'm just going to sprinkle that. Now we want about a 2-inch border around the outside, about 5 centimeters, because once we put our raspberries, we're going to wrap that pastry up and over. So sprinkle the sugar. Not only will this, sweeten the our raspberries, but it also kind of has a little barrier there, and it absorbs any juices that our raspberries will release. So I'll just spread that. What I like about this tart is it's just about simplicity of flavors. Pastry, fresh raspberries, and a little sugar. That's it. So now what we're going to do is just take our raspberries and place them on our pastry. And try to, you don't want to overlap. I like to have, like, we're just going to have 1 layer, but get them as close together as you can, because of course when they bake they will shrink just a little. They're going to release a little of their juices, so they will get a little smaller, but not a lot, because what we're going to do, we're doing this at a high heat, so it's going to be really fast. And the reason we want that is we don't want our raspberries to get too mushy. Okay, so I think I have just about the right amount. Doesn't that look gorgeous? So I just did like concentric circles. And then I'm going to taste one just to see the sweetness. They're pretty sweet. So this is where taste and then decide how much extra sugar. So I'm going to put at least another tablespoon, 15 grams over the top. Kind of soften the tartness of your raspberries. Okay, like so. Oh, that's so pretty. And raspberries are, you may know, one of my favorites. So now what we're going to do is take our pastry and just gently fold it up and over our raspberries, and then you can just kind of pleat it, and move it around and pleat it. If you find it's cracking, your pastry may be a little too cold, so just let it sit for a minute. Conversely, if it's a little, if you can tell it's too warm, you could just pop it back into the refrigerator. Let it firm up a little. So there. And then make sure you kind of pat it down, because we don't want, sometimes, and I've had this, where the pastry will unfold during baking. We don't want that. That's why we have, I prefer to have a baking pan, with sides and that, just in case we have any leakage. It stays on the pan and not in our oven. I have just a little space there. I'm going to fit. Okay, so there we have it. Put a little sugar over that. So now, for what we're going to do is just bake this way. Like I said, it's at a high heat, so only about 20-25 minutes our pastry will get set and lightly browned. And the raspberries, the reason we use large ones, because what we want is they just start to release their juice. You don't want them too mushy, just start to release. You can see a little of the beautiful raspberry juice on the bottom. So 20 to 25 minutes. Okay, our tart is done. The pastry's nicely browned, and as you can see, the raspberries have just started to release their juices. So now what I'm going to do is just let it cool in the pan on a wire rack, and when we come back, we will try some. So let's cut a piece. Still a little warm. As you can see, the raspberries still held their shape, which is what we want. That's why you want to use like larger ones rather than the little tiny ones. And then, if you want, sprinkle a little powdered sugar over the top. Makes it look pretty. You could put a few extra fresh raspberries around there. You could also put my personal favorite, some vanilla ice cream. But today we're just going to enjoy our tart. I love the pastry. Very good. Those raspberries, they've softened, they've released a little of their juice. No, they're not quite like raspberry. You cook them, they get jam, like not quite there. You can still have that really nice tart, sweet flavor, and of course the buttery crispness of the pastry. Wonderful. So if you have any leftovers, you can cover and store them. I like to store it in the fridge. And then I like it cold, and then you can just reheat it. So until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.